Okay, so hello and welcome to the Wild Woman Show. Here's what I'm imagining with these conversations that I'm having with single mums or solo mums. I'm imagining that there's a single mum out there who's just maybe left her relationship or been left, who feels like she has not much more maybe than the phone in her hand that she's listening to this on. And she's desperately searching for a signal that things will eventually be all right. So I want this conversation to be a signal to her that if she trusts herself and leans in, gets curious, and honestly just carries on, that she's on the verge of a life that she probably hasn't even dared to dream of yet. So I've invited Amber Moore to speak to us today because she's always been someone who shines through to me as being really authentic, very wise, and grounded. And because after going through divorce, she spent several years rebuilding life and business as a single mum while raising her kids, and is now in a very different place with it all. So when I asked Amber who she hoped our conversation might reach today, she said the women who have perhaps, they feel like they've lost it all after a relationship breakdown. You, Amber, know what it's like to close your businesses, to be left with piles of debt, move to a whole new country and start over with nothing. And you know it's not the end, but an opportunity. So you hope that they will take away that the best isn't behind them, it's yet to be experienced. So I want to keep our conversation like close and personal today. And so, Amber, I'd absolutely love it if you would like cast your mind back to when you became a single mum and just tell us a little bit about that journey as it was for you.
God, it feels so good to look back at that journey from this point where I am now. And I remember the first time we had a conversation about this, Claire, as well. And then it didn't feel so good. It felt really like I'd already come a long way, but it still felt really hard to talk about in many parts. And so it's actually nice to bring this to the table again, coming from like further down the line and looking back at that time. So it all began 2019. And actually, the idea of divorce started in the summer of 2019. I didn't make the leap to leave. Like, I still was in that point of believing that I could fix things. I can fix things, I can get over things, I can forgive things can be how they were. And ultimately, the sole part of me that knew that wasn't true, I couldn't let that come through at the time because fear just had me wanting to hold on. So I went through the whole of the summer just like knowing that leaving was going to happen, but trying to postpone it for as long as possible, I guess. And then November was a breakdown moment. And I really made the decision within minutes. Was like, this is it. This is the time that we pack our bags and go. So I was actually living in Egypt. I'd been living there for 7 years. And I had such gorgeous community around me. Like, I really loved everything about my life other than my marriage. Like, my life felt really good. And so this moment of leaving it all behind was terrifying. There was a lot of things that I was leaving behind that weren't actually connected to my marriage. I was shutting my businesses down. I was leaving a community that had held me and walked with me over the past 7 years. And so I made that decision, and I needed to book a plane ticket. And the whole point of this is that I needed to get myself, my children, and my unborn child at the time to safety. That was the primary concern. We were no longer safe. And so I booked that flight within a few minutes. And then I was like, I have an entire villa to sort out, and I needed to leave before my husband would return, essentially. So I had a matter of hours and days. So I had my community, all of my friends came and picked up my stuff, helped me pack everything, took stuff that I wanted to keep but couldn't travel with me. And I left there with just like carry-on luggage on the plane, no suitcases. I left all of my possessions behind, left my businesses behind, got on that plane. And I think it was when I actually got into the airport that it suddenly hit me that I was now going to be a single parent. And I just remember sitting in the, like, waiting to board the plane and just being in floods of tears. And that was the moment where the thought that actually really crossed my mind was that this was supposed to be different. You know, my mum had raised 3 children by herself, and my father hadn't been in the picture since I was maybe a few months old. And I'd always had this picture perfect. I'm married, I've got 3 children, we've got the, you know, what I imagined to be the perfect way to raise a family with both parents. That's what I'd always wanted. And I think when I got to the airport, that was the moment it hit me that I'm suddenly actually, that dream's gone. It felt like I was just repeating the patterns. I can feel it now. I want to cry. I was just repeating the patterns of my mom's life. And that was scary. That was really scary.
Gosh, I have goosebumps listening to you, Amber, talk about, and actually, like, I can feel the emotion coming up too, in terms of like what that means for people when we're telling ourselves that story. Because as I look at you now, you're somebody who clearly has addressed so many patterns in your life of things that might have just gone a certain way because of the past and because of how you were brought up, maybe, or, you know, or what you'd seen was possible for your life. And now obviously you have a situation where you've, I don't know why I want to use the word woven. It feels like you've woven something like really intricate and beautiful that is just like the pattern of, well, tell us about what your life looks like now, so that we've got this kind of stark contrast.
Like the contrast. Okay, so what life looks like now is that I'm in actually a really beautiful, loving relationship. We've been together for, I think we're coming up to 4 years now. Gosh, me and dates, I don't track time. I just stay in the present. But so we've been in this relationship for years. We're now cohabiting. He takes excellent care of all 3 of my children. I have 4 businesses that I'm maintaining at the moment. So I went from closing everything. I mean, that was another part of that story, was like, I've closed everything down. And at that moment, I couldn't imagine ever rebuilding another business. For me, that was the end of my business journey. It was like, now I have to go back to work, and now I have to find a job and a career, and there were certain things I thought I would have to do to survive. So to be here at the other end of that, all of these years later, and look at how much I've built. In fact, letting go of these businesses was the best thing that I ever could have done, because what I've created now, I love doing so much more. I get so much more fulfillment and joy out of anything that I ever did previously as well. So it's like, there was gold in that opportunity to close those businesses, that had none of this happened, I might still be running 2 businesses that I didn't enjoy. So that's changed. And my level of confidence, partnership aside, my level of confidence in raising my children has also shifted. I think when I became a single mum, the first thought was, oh my gosh, it's all on me. Provisions on me, education's on me. We were home educating the eldest 2 at the time. It was like, everything's now, the weight of the world is on me. That is how it felt. And I don't know if I'm capable. I didn't know if I could do it. I didn't believe I could do it on my own. And I think that was the biggest thing. Now I'm in that position where I feel like, I freaking got this. It wouldn't matter if I was single, partnered, whatever. Like, I have got this. I can do this. So yeah, where I am now just feels like there's so much, again, there's so much more greatness to come. But wow, what a difference. What a difference.
So you came back to the UK from Egypt. Is that how that panned out? Yeah. And what happened? Did you get a job? How did it work in that sort of initial, because this is what, you know, I literally want to speak to the woman who might be in that situation right now, so that she gets like some ideas about what might be possible for her moving forwards.
I mean, that part of the journey, so the first few months coming back, I mean, I came back to nothing. So I was carrying over like 40 to 50,000 pounds worth of debt. That's a whole story in and of itself, but I was carrying that with me. So there was this, like, there is so much money to pay off, and I have 0 income now. I came home to I had no home, no way to purchase or rent anything. My credit score was abysmal. Hadn't been here for years to even build a credit score. Like, there was just lots of, felt like things were stacked against me. And so when I got here, I'd love to say I went straight into like rebuilding my life, and I was like in the zone of going, yeah, it's going to be great. I just lent on all of the support that was available to me. And I think there's no shame or guilt in that. I think at the time I felt very guilty that I had to move in with my grandmother, and, you know, took 2 children, and I'm pregnant, and I don't have an income, and literally was living off of the back of my grandmother at that time and utilizing what was there. And there was a lot of guilt and shame around that. And there needn't have been, because these are people that love you. So if you do have a support network that you can lean on, and yet you're resisting leaning on that support network because you don't want to be the burden, and you don't want to, you don't want to have the awkward. One of the things is there was a lot of stories behind why we broke up, but I didn't want to share with people. I wasn't ready to talk about. And so I kind of isolate myself. I'd cry by myself and not lean on somebody else, or not have the conversations with somebody else, so that I didn't have to reveal all of the things that went on and some of my parts and roles to play in that story and narrative as well. So over the first few months, it was really about me actually allowing the support around me and the network that I had that enabled me to actually process what had happened. And until I was able to actually open up and be a bit more honest with my family around what had happened, and be okay with receiving support, even little things like applying for universal credit was like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be that person, kind of, and allowing myself to do those things and receive the support that was available to me, so that first and foremost, I could actually feel like my children were getting what they needed, like they were getting what they needed. And I had the space to heal and not try to rush through to some, just to put loads of extra pressure on myself. So that was one of the kind of first things. Now, it was a really awkward time when I came back, right? Because we went into, shortly after, went into lockdown, and then my 3rd child was born, and she was born with congenital defects. So she had laryngomalacia, she had a hole in her heart, she's got leaky valves, still to this day present a problem. And so suddenly it was like there was one, and again, another blessing in a way. It totally distracted me from everything that had fallen apart, because I now had this child that needed extra medical support, and we spent weeks in the hospital and those kind of things. Now that's where I found my strength, was in that moment. I remember sitting in the waiting room waiting for her to come out of surgery, and I just remember sitting there praying, speaking to the universe, the source, the spirit, to whoever would hear me, that if she made it through, I wouldn't waste another moment of my life. I wouldn't waste another moment thinking it was all over, that if she made it through, that I would make sure that I would build something for us. Like, I would make the most of this opportunity to have her alive and here with us. And so that was like the first seed of like, she's going to pull through this. And when she does, I won't waste another minute thinking about what was and what could have been. I will build something from here on out. And the second thing was looking for inspiration in other people around me. So I started watching the nurses as they were taking care, and I was amazed at how many of them were still studying. You know, they've been nurses for years and years and years, but they're still studying their craft and still learning things. And, you know, in the ICU, when they've got to be present with that child the whole time, but there's not always something for them to actually do. They're just monitoring. You know, they'd be studying and up-leveling their skills and doing all of the stuff, and I was just in awe of them. And I was like, maybe I could do that. Like, maybe I could actually retrain to be a children's nurse. You said something, Claire, about curiosity of what's possible for you. And that was my spark of curiosity. It was like, maybe there are other options. I'd never considered being a children's nurse before. That hadn't entered my head, but maybe there are other options if I'm open to them. What could I do? What could I train in? And so I sat in that hospital waiting room and filled out an application to my local university to study children's nursing whilst I was there by her bedside. And that all happened within a really short space of time. So I think what I thought I had planned for my life, and where I had disappeared, and I could have looked at that only through the lens of, well, everything's over. And I think when you are able to look at it as go, there are actually an abundance of opportunities for what my life could look like next, what's next on the path, then doors start to open up. And as you know, I'm now not a children's nurse, but that was like the doorway, right? The gateway to thinking that there was something else out there.
That's so interesting, because I mean, it's given me goosebumps again anyway, particularly the point at which, you know, you sit there and make this commitment to yourself: I will not waste another moment. I wonder how many people have a moment like that when they do what we've both done, which is, you know, stick it out through thick and thin. You know, sometimes a lot more thin than thick, you know. To have that moment where you make that commitment. I don't know if you know that my moment like that is kind of a combination of my dad dying quite young and a very good friend having cancer and dying way too young. And that was for me the moment where I sort of said to myself, do you know what, this is a gift, this life, and I do not want to waste it. You know, I kind of owe it to my friend who didn't get to continue with her life to make the most of mine. And actually, you know, having a connection with her in the spirit world and think she's not letting me off the hook. Like, okay, Fee, I'm on it. Like, I'm doing the best I can. Also trying to raise some kids here, you know, but yes, I will do the big work. I'll do it. I promise. But then the other thing that you just said, which is escaping me right now. No, what did you say at the end there? Oh, it was a real synchronicity. You are not a children's nurse, but that is the thing that sort of opened the door to possibilities. When I first went to an NLP practitioner, which is what I then went on to train in, partly with him and then partly lots of other training. So that's neuro-linguistic programming, coaching. And he asked me again and again in the first 2 or 3 sessions that we had, you know, what do you want? What do you want? And he would not let up with that. What do you want? Because I'm 100% sure that at that time, I was, like a great many people, very focused on what I didn't want. I knew exactly what I didn't want, but it was hard for me to articulate what I did want. And at the end, I think of maybe the 3rd session, it just kind of came out. I was like, I want to be a doctor. I want to help people. I want to be a doctor. And he was like, well, there we go. Finally, we have it, you know. And then I think he said something as I sort of left that session that day, like, well, I'll see you at your graduation or something like that. You know, I'm not a doctor. I sit here today, but it opened the door to possibility for me to imagine myself doing something that I probably, you know, the practicalities of how that might have looked as a new single mum with my kids were 2.5 and 4, 5 at that time, to have the almost like audacity, you know, to go, yeah, I could do one of the hardest trainings that takes the longest, you know, that is all consuming and breaks people. I could do that. Why not? You know, as a single mum, yeah, sure. Like, let me look at open days, you know. Yeah.
And this is that's a whole other thing, isn't it? Because there are things that we then start to say, well, I couldn't do that. So when I went home and told my mum, and I was like, I've applied to do a children's nursing degree, she was like, right now, you've just given birth, you've just come back, you've got no reliable income. What part of you thinks this is a good idea and time to go and retrain? Not that I couldn't retrain. She wasn't saying that wasn't a possibility. She was just like, this is just not the time for that. And in my mind, it was like, there is no better time. Like, it's going to be any time, it's going to be now. And I got accepted into the children's nursing course and did 2 years of it. And it was at that time where people were saying to me, like, how are you managing all of this? And I was like, because I've chosen it. I've chosen to be the primary caregiver for my children. I have chosen single, and that was a big thing, that, like, a mindset switch. And I don't know when that happened, but there was a switch between, this has happened to me and I've now become a single mum and I have to pick up the pieces, versus I chose to walk out the door. I made this decision. I've chosen, and now I'm going to step up to that choice. And that doesn't have to look like me sacrificing my interests, my possibilities, the waiting. I think someone actually said to me, why don't you wait until they're a little bit older, like high school age, and then they'll have more freedom? And I was like, why would I wait? I can't wait. There's a part of me that just doesn't know. I'm quite impatient. I don't do waiting very well. And so I did those 2 years of that degree. And during that, I had to make some decisions. So again, things had to change. Things had to shift. I could no longer home educate my children, be full-time university study, work part-time, and look after a child that had additional medical needs, and then meet my own self-care needs and everything else, right? That it wouldn't have worked that way. And so there was another dream that had to be let go of, which was give the education to my children that I had always wanted to give to myself. And in the end, I found the perfect place. In my mind, it was the perfect place. It was a Montessori school, and it was private, and I've just come back with debt, no real income, like not significant income. Yes, I now had my student loans and things like that once I started at uni, which was really helpful and a godsend. But I had, in societal norms, no right. I'm really struggling to put this into words, but it felt like I had no right to be looking at private schools. How on earth are you going to afford that? Who do you think you are to send your child to a private school? But that was the school that made me feel comfortable putting them into an educational environment. And so I applied and figured it out. I figured out how I was going to afford it. I made payment plans with the school, the beautiful community school. They're amazing, absolutely amazing. And so I made that happen. And again, there were voices. So there are going to be the voices that support you, the ones that will have your back no matter what decision you make. There will be the people that will maybe not necessarily agree with the decisions that you'll make, but they will support you within them. And so I had people in my life that were like that. I had those people solid in my life. And I also had the people in my life that would say, what insane decisions are you making? And they try to steer me off course. And I think, I don't know if it's stubbornness, the rebel in me, this is my life now as well, that part of me that said, this is my life and I'm doing this for my children and I will have what I want for them. It's like, I'm not willing to bend. And so, yeah, I sent them to a private school. Yes, it stretched every penny. I didn't send them to a private school and have money left over and suddenly have this massive amount of wealth. I sent them to a private school and was rubbing pennies together and, trying to find ways to ensure that we still had food on the table and all of those kinds of things. And so I chose a challenge. But I chose a challenge that enabled me to create the life that I now envisioned for myself as a single parent, and that gave me that sense of safety. Enrolling my children in that school gave me more sense of safety than it would have other schools that we looked at. So I don't know how that helps anyone. I do know
for sure. Even that, it helps me, frankly, Amber, at this particular point in time. I'm home educating both of my kids when they're with me, and technically one of them, it always annoys me that people get so het up on sort of terminology, because you're not allowed to identify yourself as a home educating family. God forbid you would use the words homeschooling,
Yeah.
The flexi schooling thing, which a lot of people don't know exists, but it's part-time school, part-time at home. And I just can't continue in good faith to send my kids, at least when they're with me, to the education system as it currently stands in the UK. No matter how kind of small and lovely looking that school is, it's still under that particular system, which I just can't do it. I can't, the path of being in integrity with yourself, and the cost to, I think, often unrecognized cost within themselves to women of living out of integrity and without the authenticity to who you really are and what you really believe. And that is no slight on other women, because I think, we're forced into those situations so often by society to have to make the impossible choice, you know, of how do I make money as a single parent at the same time as providing what I want for my kids educationally and practically and financially and all of these things. So to hear you say that you made that choice and it stretched, you know, the finances to the very nth degree, and that you did it with a background of with that sort of level of debt, I find it very helpful personally. I'll for the listener, just to kind of, you know, the different paths of single parents, and it's all just totally valid. Like you've talked, and I just thought it was absolutely beautiful to hear you say leaning on the support that you have without compromising, having to, for example, give your whole story to them. You know what I mean? Not having to sort of justify why you need that support or are accessing it at this time. I absolutely love that. And for me, because I live in Scotland and my family was in England, it's almost like it's not Egypt to the UK in terms of, you know, you don't have anywhere to go. Like I had the house that we had been living in as a family when we separated, and I knew that wasn't going to stay forever, but I did also know that I would get some money from that. And although I wasn't technically eligible for a mortgage because my very low income as a mum to a baby and part-time work that was mostly going into childcare anyway, I did have the backup of, and there's all sorts of things like this that you don't know exist, but they do. I had the backup of something that was like new legislation that had just come out, and it was about how banks couldn't hold people mortgage prisoner. So if they had given you a mortgage before, they couldn't then make you go onto a worse deal or something. So they kind of had to like uphold the deal that I'd had and keep their word to me as a client that I could have a mortgage with a good deal, basically. So I wasn't trapped into a sort of situation where I couldn't afford a mortgage now. So that kind of backed me up. Then what you said about university, I went and did a counselling diploma, and the support available at the university for anybody in sort of financial distress, but particularly if you're a single parent, they paid for childcare for me for that entire year. And the childcare that they paid for went way beyond the time I was attending university because it was a part-time course. But that made such a huge difference to my finances, you know, in that. And I didn't know when I signed up. I, like you, just thought, gosh, this is going to be a massive kind of commitment time-wise and, you know, financially as well. I was like literally thinking, how am I going to afford the parking at the university? You know, how am I going to afford lunch when I'm there? And then suddenly what comes back is this support I didn't even know was available. But when I first became a single mum, there was a sliver of, do I go back and live where I grew up in Leicester? And I don't know, live with my mum. That would be extremely challenging because we have a very, very difficult relationship. You know, my sister, bless her heart, she rang me one day and she said, okay, I've talked it through with my husband. Here's how it's going to work. You move back. You live in a house close to us. On Wednesday afternoons, we take the kids. We take them to school on Thursday morning. So you have that whole Wednesday evening. We'll have them every other weekend. We'll feed them, we'll bathe them, we'll clothe them. And I'm just listening to this like outpouring of love and support. And you probably do. You have some idea how tempting it was to go, I'll take that. That sounds much better than what ended up happening. Was like, it was a couple of years for me until COVID, but suddenly I was like completely on my own. You know, nobody wants to bubble with a single mum who doesn't have anything to give back. Do you know what I mean? They all chose their mum, thanks very much, or their best friend who's got a husband who does useful things, or it was just like so isolating. And I had that option of that kind of familial support, but it came with too big a compromise for me. And like you know, those compromises, again, I'm stubborn. I think it really pays at this particular point in time when you're reimagining and redesigning your life practically from scratch, to be really stubborn and uncompromising about what you want.
Yeah.
Why not?
Oh gosh, something just came to me as you spoke that as well, which was allow what you want to change, and to change again, and to change again, and to change again, and to change again. Because there is a healing journey that happens. There is an emotional healing journey, and what you want at the beginning of that journey is like you said earlier, often based on what we know we don't want. And so we often go to the extreme polar opposite of what we don't want. Well, then I want this. I want the complete opposite of whatever that is. And we'll start working towards that. And there might be a point on that journey that as you're healing, your desire changes. What you want, what you envision for yourself changes. And you get to move with that. Like, uphold your standards, uphold your commitments. So because there was a big swing, right? I went from going like, I will never put my children in school, ever, ever, ever. I'm not doing it, to, well, this actually could be really great for them. Because, and again, like, I look at I'm talked a lot about what I feel like I kind of lost when I left that relationship and left Egypt, the community and all the things. But they also lost their father, essentially. They lost, well, not even essentially, they did. They lost their father. He's made very little contact in all of the years we've been gone. They lost their closest friendships. You know, we tried to maintain, and we still speak to some of the families from Egypt in our community there, of course, but not the same. We were in each other's houses every single day. They were with their best friends every single day. They were learning together every single day. And so when we came back here, that whole kind of, their world had also changed. Their world had also shifted. And it kind of gave me this realization that actually that school and the community like atmosphere that it had around it also gave them back that social element that they weren't getting when we first came back. And so that I will never do that, turned into well, actually, this could be the best thing for us. And had I stuck with, no, there's like that flexible zone. It's like what I wanted when I first had children and what I decided I was going to have and what it was going to look like. I could have just stuck like really strong to that, and my life would look very different now, I'm sure. I allowed myself to be flexible, to move with what was truly valuable to me at that time and to what I knew they truly needed as well, without making it mean anything about me, you know, without making it mean like I'm not staying true to what I always said that I wanted, or judging myself for having a shift in desire or a shift in value or a shift in belief. Like, actually allowing myself to say, do you know what, that's what I used to believe and think and feel, and now I'm seeing some benefits over here and I'm okay with that. Yeah. But it can only be because it's your truth. That I think that's the difference. When it's because it's somebody else's truth that you think you have to keep up with, that's where it gets really muddy. But when it's your soul truth and you can kind of stand in that and own that. And you said something about grounded and confident in the beginning, and I think that's where my confidence and grounding comes from, really, is like, I had to go with what's in here.
Yeah. And like you said, there will be voices always that are supportive, and there'll be voices that are sort of supportive but don't really believe it's possible, because you're a magical thinker. You know, that to have those possibilities stay open for you, you have to sort of think somewhat magically. Because like you said, a lot of people would just look at the sort of bare bones of the spreadsheet of the situation with the school and the private fees and debt and the current financial situation, and they would just write it off. You know, that would be a no. But when you do have this kind of flexibility of thought and feeling, it opens up all these possibilities. And it's just really cool to hear. What I wanted these conversations to be is, because I hear a lot of people talk in the abstract about this stuff. I want to hear the details. Like, I'm so glad you named the level of debt, for example. I would actually love to hear how it worked out in terms of the fees of the school and kind of the payment plan and pay. You don't have to give absolute numbers. I'm just kind of wondering, like, what dropped in,
what happened, how did
it happen?
So similar to you, once I started at the university, I suddenly realised that there were childcare grants available to me. And because it was a private educational institution as opposed to public, I was able to use that as the childcare grant towards school costs. So it didn't cover the entire fees, but it covered a large proportion of them. So that was really helpful. I was at university, I started online transcribing at night, and like, I don't necessarily recommend this for anyone, because I did kill myself trying to do this and I did burn out, but it did see me through. So I mean, weigh up your own pros and cons, right? But I would spend, so after I got the kids to bed around 8:30, 9ish, sometimes 11 o'clock, depending on how much of a fuss they put up. But after they've finally gone to sleep, I'd open up the laptop and there is something called rev.com. And I used to transcribe audios and videos before AI did it all for you, and sit and do transcriptions. And I got paid per minute of video that I transcribed. And so I'd spend probably sometimes up until 3 a.m. in the morning earning additional money in that way, get a few hours sleep, and then get back up and do the school run. But the other thing that shifted, this tangible, but maybe less tangible, was the way that I saw the debt. Because at first it felt like a big black hole that I was never going to be able to climb out of. Like, I couldn't ever imagine myself having £50,000 there or thereabouts spare to just pay it off. Like, it was never just going to be paid off in one chunk. And I think that for me was scary. Making the phone calls to people, I won't go into my whole journey, but way before, like when my first child was born, I suffered with severe social anxiety. And one of the things that I've always found quite hard is actually having those difficult conversations with companies on the phone has always filled me with fear. And so just making those phone calls and sitting down one afternoon, getting the list of people that, the credit cards and all of the different things where money was owed, and either making phone calls or sending emails, explaining situations, and really taking control of that situation was super important. Me, because what actually started to happen was, there were either payment plan options, they'd say it would go to debt collectors and then I could make arrangements with the debt collectors. There were payment pauses. One of the debts got wiped off completely because I was able to prove that even though it had been taken out in my name, it wasn't actually my money that I'd used, and all of those things. So that debt got cleared. And so just by taking a proactive approach to it rather than burying my head in the sand, which is what I really wanted to do and did do for a while, and have helped to change the pressure around the debt. And I have two things. One thing, when it comes to debt, the way that I see this, or when, like, any time you choose to put something on a credit card or a payment plan, like, it is a choice to pay something off over time. And there are going to be times where things maybe happen, where you miss a payment, or for whatever reason it happens. The worst you can do is beat yourself up about it. The best thing that you can do is get proactive and say, okay, what do we do from here? And that really helped. So I didn't focus on trying to clear the debt at that time. I figured that by the time I qualified, got a full-time salary, then I would be able to do things. So what I did was just focus on managing. I set up some of the largest debts on £5 a month. And I was like, at £5 a month, I'm probably not ever going to pay this off in my lifetime. But at £5 a month, nobody's sending me letters, chasing me. I've not got the pressure on my head. And there are people who are going to listen to that and think that is such an irresponsible way. Like, you should be paying off your debt. I don't care.
No.
Did what I needed to do in order to continue to live.
I love this.
It wouldn't have served me to either panic about it, and it certainly wouldn't have served me to pay as much off as I could and leave myself stressed, overwhelmed, unable to meet my family's needs. How does that serve me? So
and I want to bring this right into the present moment. So I've currently got my mortgage on an interest only payment. What's it called? The mortgage charter. Okay. So they do this thing called the mortgage charter. And for 6 months, you can either take the the hit of impacting your credit rating and basically not really pay anything, or you can just pay the interest and you don't affect your credit rating, but obviously the monthly payment is not as much as if you were paying off the extra. And I have done that right now in a growth phase for me, where I've been managing like life, pretty intense life for sort of about the last 6 months, so that my income has taken a dip while I build some stuff that I know is absolutely, it's dependent on me staying regulated and well and freaking fed,
Yeah.
and being able to pay my other bills and stuff. And so I took that proactive approach in order to do that. I think my door's just gone.
Ooh.
I think I might just have to. So I'm going to hand over to you, Amber, to talk about this while I'm not here for just a moment, if that's okay.
Yeah, no problem at all. Happily. It's also knowing the systems. I don't consider myself to be very financially literate. And we spoke earlier about generational friends. I don't feel like I had excellent role models, bless my mum, in terms of having money to manage, like having a significant amount of money to manage, but also having somebody to sit down and teach me. Like, I don't ever remember being taught money management at school, beyond how to count money and add up money. I never had a financial education. So it was like, educate yourself. What actually happens? One of my credit cards, I couldn't make the monthly payments. I just couldn't. And that was the fact. There was no additional money to make those monthly payments within everything else that I was doing and had. And I'd spoken to them about it, and they weren't willing to reduce the monthly payments. They weren't willing to do it. I think they put it on a 3-month pause. And then after the 3 months, the payment remained the same, and it just continued. And every time, as does with a lot of credit cards, it wasn't just the payment, it was then the interest that was going on each month, which was then increasing the balance, which the balance was just getting out of hand because of the amount of interest that was going on top. And I was just like, it felt like a mountain that I was never going to be able to climb. And I remember someone said to me, why don't you just let it go to the debt collectors? Again, please, this is not financial advice. This is just what happened for me. And in my whole body, I was like, I can't do that. I can't do that. That seems insane. Why would I do that? And they went, because the moment it does, the interest stops. And then you can set up an affordable repayment plan. And then the debt will start to go down and it won't continue to build. And they were like, every missed payment is already a knock-on your credit score. You're already, like, my credit score is already in the floor. It can't really get much worse at this point. So it going to debt collectors, it doesn't look any worse. And it gives me an opportunity to set up an affordable payment plan. And it gives me the opportunity to stop the interest. And it enables me then to get that debt paid off, rather than what was happening was the debt was just getting bigger and it was growing. And I was like, that's the scariest thing to do, to just say, I'm not going to pay this and just let it to go there. Felt terrifying. But that debt's now all cleared. It would not have been cleared at this point it may not have been, I can't say would not have been, but may not have ever been cleared at this point had I not made a decision that was slightly scary, but ultimately used the system to my advantage.
That's so cool. And like you say, not financial advice, just practically speaking, what happened for you, and because we cannot predict the future. And so you can really only do in the moment something that is within the options available to you. But what I'm hearing you say is those options are wider than you think they are, often when you're in a panic state about stuff. We know this about the mind, about the brain and how it works.
Yeah. And it's not like I now want to swim in debt again. So I'm still choosing now to pay that off. And I'm not choosing to live in a constant state of playing that game and playing with fire, as it felt. it was like, this is how I'm going to navigate this situation and circumstance. And who I choose to be now is the woman who pays things on time, doesn't take things out that she doesn't know she's going to be able to pay off. You know, I have something this year that I'm working on, which is I won't buy it unless I can pay for it in full. So if it means that I have to have a payment plan in order to be able to afford this thing, I don't want it. I'd rather save until I can buy it outright than put it on a card. So those opportunities that I had taught me a lot about what I don't want to have moving forward in my life. You know, so it's not, because you can also get caught in that trap where, well, that worked, I did that last time, so let me just get another and I'll do it again and it will be fine. And it's like, no, because that puts you in a stress state. That puts you in a situation that you don't want to be in, that continuously repeats the loop and cycle. It wasn't about just okaying the situation I created. It was about managing and handling the situation I created and then learning from it and not creating it again for myself.
Moving forward differently. Yeah, I totally hear that. And I, having been somebody who's pretty much always paid stuff off in full, in some ways my stretch is to go a bit the other way. Like, could I pay for something that I don't technically have the money to pay for in full right now? Would be a stretch for me. And I think actually we can get trapped either direction. Do you know what I mean? You can totally get trapped either direction. I don't want to go there and I don't want to have to go there, but actually as a choice I might do it. I heard this thing once that I really loved, and it was a woman who had an entrepreneurial dad, basically, and she said that she'd been talking to him about some investment she wanted to make into herself, and I think it was like business coaching type investment, something along those lines. And she said, she said to her dad, I don't know, it just feels a bit like a gamble, you know, and I'm not sure if it will pay off. And he said, you're literally betting on yourself, so you're in control of whether it pays off or not. I don't see why you wouldn't make that bet, you know. And at the time, I'm like the first entrepreneur, you know, in my family line. I don't know about you, we'll maybe hear that in a minute, but you know, my family is so deeply kind of risk averse, in the sense of investing in yourself in something that would be unconventional. You know, they literally probably think I've just taken so many financial risks because my investments over the last 8 years have pretty primarily been upgrades to body, mind, soul and spirit. There's, you know, some of those have come with certificates, but not from, you know, an esteemed university, or and the only person who can really say that was well worth the thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds I've spent on it is me and maybe my clients. But, you know, it's like, I absolutely loved hearing somebody get that validation from a parental figure that you can invest in yourself and it will always be worth it if you choose for it to be worth it.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting one. And I also like the fact that it's like you're betting on you, because that's in a completely different shift. And when it comes to investing in something like coaching or even a course or a certification, there is a role that that person plays in providing the education to ensure that it is what you need to get you to where you go, or to qualify you, to certify you, or whatever it is, right? They have a role to play. They have a responsibility and obligation to provide what you are paying for. But you have a responsibility to show up and use it. You have a responsibility to show up and so it's like, I have an example of this when I invested in something that is insane. When I look back at it, I still to this day don't understand how that version of me made that decision. I invested in this 3-day business masterclass. It was over 5,000. It might have been closer to 10,000. I can't remember, but it was a 3-day whole event. And it was online and it was hosted in the US. So it meant actually that I started at like 3 o'clock in the afternoon UK time and went on like way into the night. And it was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. But the event was aimed, and most of the people attending that event were not solo business owners. We're talking about people that owned multi-billion pound corporation type things, you know, multiple offices around the place. And there was a lot about leading teams and just so much stuff that I didn't really need, and yet somehow got so much enjoyment out of, and so much fulfillment out of listening into the conversations and the stories and the inspiration. But there was one part of that 3-day event that was worth every single penny I ever spent, and I didn't even know it was going to be part of this thing. And it was these like kind of breakout rooms. So in between each of the kind of workshops and calls, we got put into breakout rooms with each other to discuss what we'd heard and our learnings and our golden nuggets and things like this. And I just got an opportunity to sit in these rooms with these like FTSE 500 company owners and ask them questions. How did they get to where they were? If they were in my position, what would they do? Like, I got so much mentoring and guidance from people that had just, some of them gone from nothing, some of them had gone bankrupt and rebuilt, and I was in a stage where I was just starting to rebuild, just going back into creating my own business for myself again. And I was getting all of this kind of just gold over those 3 days, and there was a lot of it that I came away from that event and I was like, I've got not a lot to apply right now. I got inspired, I got some, you know, words of wisdom from people. But I kept in touch with quite a few of the people that I met over those three days. I also got to a certain point in my business where I was like, oh, now it's time I can use that thing. And now it's time I could use that thing. So the ROI, the return on investment of that wasn't immediate. And part of me was like, I'm so excited to do this. The other part of me is like, what the hell am I doing? Why am I doing this? This makes no sense at the time. It made no sense at the time. But now I have all of that to go back on. Now I have all of that to draw upon for the stage of business that I'm at now and so forth. And so there are things that I have been able to implement from it. And there are connections that I've made that have really just given back to me, and I've given back to them in so many different ways. The kind of point of this is that we don't always know. We want to predict what the ROI will be. Like, I thought I'm going to qualify and be a children's nurse, and then I'm going to hit this kind of salary paycheck, and then I'm going to work myself up the bands, and then I'll have this kind of salary, right? That's what I thought the ROI would be. No, what I actually learned in that role was just so much about myself. I learned so much about myself. I learned so much about the NHS systems. I learned a lot about mental health of patients. I learned just so much gold that I've been able to bring through into my own work. And it just took me on a completely different trajectory to which I had imagined it would. So the ROI, like the investment, was worth it in so many ways. But if to the outside world, well, you didn't qualify, you didn't qualify, you didn't work as a children's nurse, like, what, it was a waste of time. There was nothing about that experience that was a waste of time for me, nothing at all. And I think that's what you can't see when you're going to invest in something, whether you're paying for it in full or paying it outright, is actually what you're going to get that isn't on the curriculum.
Yeah. Oh, I love that so much. The first ever investment I made into my personal development journey was more than my monthly salary, which at the time was fairly low, and it was significantly more than my monthly salary at that time. And I remember my heart like beating out of my chest. I was becoming aware of the kind of types of voices that I had sort of influencing me. I could hear my whole family being like, you've just been scammed, you know, that like, what the hell are you thinking? But I will tell you what, it was like a 12-week thing, and they had audios to listen to, and it was one of the kind of typical big, you know, personal development guys in the US. Again, you know, American quackery as far as my parents would be concerned, and just like a load of rubbish, positive thinking mumbo jumbo. And I committed myself so hard to that like program of study. Essentially, some of it still comes back to me to this day, because it was so important. I needed something coming into my brain that was so vastly different from what I'd had before, because I was intentionally up leveling. And actually, I remember being really cross with one of my mentors when I'd been learning from him for like 3 years, and I'd had all sorts of like personal relationships sort of melt down across this time, and people just being like, oh, you've changed so drastically, like deeply insulted by my capacity to change. And it was only about 3 years in that he said, oh, when I first started doing this work, I said to my wife, I intend to change, and I intend to change quite drastically with the stuff that I'm doing. So my intention is for that to be very positive for our relationship, but I can't guarantee that. And I was like, James, you absolute bastard. You never told me, you've been with me from the very beginning of my journey. Do you think that would have been a useful thing to say at the beginning when I didn't know that I needed to state to the people in my life, by the way, I'm going to absolutely melt down and re-emerge as a beautiful butterfly. And I hope you will enjoy that butterfly, but the melting down isn't going to be so fun. You might think I've gone a bit mad, and I'm sure some of them still do. But that was interesting to me, that sort of the awareness that if you're changing, it's going to be really affronting for a lot of people in your life. Have you experienced that? I'm guessing probably yes.
It's been interesting. I don't think I've experienced it as much as many people, and I think a big part of that is a lot of my change happened in a period of time where I wasn't connected to many people. So my personal development journey really started when I became a mum. Like it probably started a little bit before that, because there was a kind of leap that got me to Egypt in the first place, and that was part of a vision boarding thing that I did, and really choosing my life path at that point. So it kind of started there. But when I hit that rock bottom moment with the social anxiety, I had to transform myself in order to create connections with people. I didn't have any friends. I didn't have a network of people that I spoke to. I didn't talk to anyone. So there wasn't really anybody to say, you've changed. Like, the only evidence of my changing is that I was getting out of the house more, that I was starting to have conversations with people. I do remember the moment of change where I'd been back in the UK for a while. Like, I'd kind of got settled. I'd got used to being a single mum. I'd grown in my confidence. And my friend Suzanne, who I met in the UK, met in Egypt, but she's also from the UK. So she came back to the UK to visit her family, and it was her son's birthday. And we went up to Birmingham to see her and visit them for the birthday. And all of her family were in the living room. And I walked into the living room, and somebody said something to me, and they had a newborn baby in their arms, and I started talking to them, and she was talking about not sleeping, and I'm just giving all of this advice and chatting away, really animated. And I walk out of the room, and Sue is literally, she's got tears streaming down her face, and I'm like, you're all right? You okay? She was like, just give me a hug. I was like, okay, you can have a hug. She was like, what was that? She was like, you never used to say boo to a goose. She's like, you wouldn't really speak unless you were spoken to. She was like, you just walked in that room and kind of commanded the space. And she was like, just a different person. Because it'd been so long since we'd really seen each other. I think the transformation in that level of confidence and ability to converse in a room also just shocked her. So I've been on the positive, like, had that real positive experience of change. I don't think I've had many moments where it's really broken my relationships. And I think there was a relationship not so long ago, just a couple of years ago, that had been a long-term childhood friendship that did break down. And it purely is, in my opinion, that we have just grown in very different directions, different views on the world, different values in life, very different experiences of adulthood, just very different life paths. And there was a breakdown there, but it was also very mature. It was kind of like, I think this is just where we close the doors. And there was no real blow up or anything. It's like, I can see that we don't agree, and we're not going to come to an agreement, and this conversation isn't going to really go very far. So it was kind of just like both parties. And it hurts a little bit when people can't see not your point of view. It's not about them seeing your point of view, but the value of who you've become. I think, because you've chosen to evolve in a certain way, in a certain direction. You've chosen to, for me, it's a lot about perspective shift. You've chosen to become somebody who shifted your perspective in the world in order for you to move in a certain way in your life, or to accomplish certain things in your life. And you've been improving yourself to a certain point where you think that is a better version of you, regardless of what anyone else thinks. You feel better within yourself and about yourself. And I think that's one of the most important things that any of us can feel. So when someone doesn't see the value in who you've become, can feel quite personal. And so I try to remind myself, if things like that do happen, is there's just their value filter is different. Like the value that they hold for themselves and for others is different to the values that I hold for myself.
You know, I also think that if you are somebody who does go through the, let's face it, pretty difficult process of making changes about who you fundamentally are, you know, how you show up in the world, the thoughts you automatically think, you go through that hard often, easier with things like hypnosis and NLP, but still pretty, you know, affronting to the system. And I mean, the inner system and the outer system. People in your life no longer are able to convince themselves that change is not possible. And it's sometimes easier to get rid of the person than it is to get rid of the toxic habit or way of thinking, or, you know, sometimes the psyche, the ego, whatever it is, cannot tolerate this evidence, I think, that it's possible to change. And I mean, that's one particular filter and way of looking at it that I've sort of chosen to adopt, because in my journey there's been quite a lot of people who've stepped away from me, and I am very self-aware. One of the things is I'm very self-aware, and I know I can be an incredibly difficult person to spend time with. You know, I know like a whole heap of my flaws, and I'm sure there are more still to be discovered, but I'm kind of willing to be affronting to a certain number of people and so deeply attractive to the other people who are meant for me, who are going to support me, champion me, who I can champion, who do not make those excuses around making those changes that they want, you know, to make or would love to make, and who don't push people away that kind of affront how they're choosing to show up in the world. So yeah, it's definitely a journey in that respect.
I'm listening to that and thinking, do you know what? Sometimes I think I just have blinkers on, because I just assume people like me. And if they don't, they're just not in my space. It sounds horrendous. But I used to assume everybody hated me or everybody had some kind of judgment of me. And now I'm just the polar opposite, where it's like, I actually don't spend a lot of time thinking about what you think of me anymore.
Yeah, that's the healthy way.
Sometimes I think it's really healthy, and I'm sure there are times where there is a disadvantage, or where that could actually limit interactions. I don't know, but I definitely know that it's protected my sanity in many ways. It's protected my sanity, and ultimately, if you're listening to this, this is your life. Being a single mum doesn't stop you from living your life. This is your life experience. Your children's life experience is their life experience. And we have a responsibility perhaps towards one another, but we do not have a responsibility for one another. And what I mean by that is that I don't get to control you. You don't get to control me. We coincide and we cohabit together. And I have a responsibility, like, for myself. The only person that I can take control of is me. And the only person I have to live with for 24 hours every single day, from the day that I was born to the day that I die, is me. I have to listen. So I often think we look at our relationships around us for our source of validation or self-approval or sense of love or whatever it might be, hoping that that's what we're going to, there's so many angles I was going to go with this, hoping that that's what we're going to receive from those relationships, but also forgetting that all of that is almost just like a gift. The love that you receive is a gift. The validation that you receive is a gift. The recognition you receive is a gift, but it is not a given, and you don't need it. Like, you don't need it, because this was explained to me once, and this kind of changed my perspective on a lot of things, which is, you know, when you're a child and you're an infant, you're first learning to walk, and someone celebrates you and they clap you on, and it's like, oh, you did it, and you're moving along, and there's smiles on the face, and so you do it a little bit more, and then you start to perfect it, and eventually there comes this point where nobody claps you for walking anymore. Can you imagine if you started to walk out of the door and your children started doing a round of applause because you were suddenly like walking, like, you took a step, mum, well done. Like, there's only certain circumstances where that would happen, right? So it's like there's this point where validation or celebration of you or like cheering on of you kind of stops with everything you do. When you start a new skill, people will encourage you. I remember when I first started coaching and I started doing lives, you know how I love a live. I started doing lives, and the first live that I ever did was supposed to be inside a private Facebook group. It wasn't, it was on my personal feed, and I shared things that I didn't really want to be shared publicly because I don't know if I was ready to announce them yet. I shared my entire business plan, my business ideas, what I was going to be up to, how I was going to feel about it, what I was scared of, what I was looking forward to. Like, I shared it all. And then I started seeing, like, as I was live, people's names that weren't part of this group, that were friends and like people I'd gone to school with, like, cheering me on. And I'm like, where am I live? This is not supposed to be visible to people. Massive panic moment. I was like, all right, just carry on now because I'm here. Got off and was mortified. I've got a point with that now because it just what was I saying before?
People cheering you on for walking.
So they would cheer, and I got kind of like a boost of like, I can actually do this. People are behind me. They get it. They're not judging me. Like, they actually see the value in what I'm doing. Okay. And I got really excited about doing lots of lives. And there's a point in my business, if any of you are business owners, you might recognize, like, know this point, where all of the people who are not your ideal clients, so a lot of those people who were cheering me on, they wouldn't have been people necessarily that worked with me, you know? And so it comes a point where they're not your ideal client and they're no longer cheering you on. They're just kind of sick of hearing you talk about your business and not really interested anymore because it doesn't pertain to them. It's of no interest to them. It's not really anything to do with them. And so the cheering stops, and you start going, like, having that internal dialogue of they don't see me anymore. They don't support me anymore. No one's celebrating me. No one comments anymore. No one shows up when I'm live. And it's like, well, all of that momentum you had in the beginning was that infantile stage of people patting you on the back. And what that's supposed to do, and the way this was explained to me, is that that's modeling how you're supposed to talk to yourself. The way that we cheer infants on is modeling behavior, and there comes this point where you're supposed to take that over and cheer yourself on. You now get it. You've learned what it feels like to be celebrated, to celebrate yourself, to like acknowledge your accomplishments, to validate yourself. And so there's no handing over of the baton. It feels like we've lost something, but we haven't. It's just like, it's handed over to you. Now you take the lead. You celebrate yourself. You cheer yourself on. You validate yourself.
This is so relevant to something that I'm literally just learning, like, in real time in the coaching that I'm doing with Kasia Urbaniak recently. And she says this beautiful thing. It's lived with me ever since I heard it just a few weeks ago. And that is that you celebrate yourself until the words are like dust in your mouth. Like, if there's still any juice left in it, you keep celebrating. And I love that so much. And some of the stuff that's happening for me right now in life, I'm like internally celebrating in a way like I never have before, because I'm not done. Those words aren't dust yet. I'm so excited about what's happening in life and business and parenting and everything, you know, that I'm just like, I'm going to keep saying, like, you're literally just the same exact thing as you're saying. And I think for me, as I listen to you there, I didn't necessarily have that self-celebration modeled to me as a kid. And so I'm sort of reclaiming it as an adult, as like, this is actually how we're supposed to internally speak to ourselves, celebrate ourselves. I've said recently to my kids, if ever they're kind of beating themselves up about anything, look, you know, you don't find a daffodil there, like looking over at a rose going, ah, oh, I should be redder, I should be more this shaped, you know, I should be slightly taller and a bit more thorny and whatever. Like, nature doesn't do that to itself. And as far as I'm concerned, as humans, the unique way that you show up is absolutely perfect. Better at maths, it's a skill, you can learn it, whatever, you know, that's not so much like feature of a thing that's fixed forever. That's something you can grow into. But, you know, worse at something, or just who you actually are and who you're going to end up being, is infinitely beautiful as far as I'm concerned, and very well worth celebrating.
Definitely. And there's an opportunity, just bringing this back to single motherhood and that kind of journey that you're now navigating, if you're listening to this, that celebration of you, celebrate your strength and courage to get to wherever you are right now. It doesn't matter where you are, but wherever you are, celebrate your strength, celebrate your courage, celebrate your emotions, celebrate the fact that you are actually still getting up for your children each day. You are still feeding them. You are still getting them to wherever they need to be. You are still taking care of their needs. How many times have you got into bed since, I remember this for me, I'd get into bed and at the end of the day and just feel like I haven't done enough. I'm one person. I can't do all of this by myself. I can't meet all of the demands. I can't meet all of the needs. And what I wasn't doing was celebrating and recognizing, well, do you know what? You did. Because they're here, they're healthy, they're safe, they're fed, they've had hugs, they've had their emotional needs taken care of, and they're now tucked up in their nice warm beds under a safe roof.
Mm-hmm.
Getting ready for another day tomorrow, getting the sleep that they need, and you did good.
Yeah, with the resources that you have at the time, which might be severely depleted, you are doing enough. And I think that is a really gorgeous message for us to end on. So thank you so much for coming to speak to me today, Amber, and to speak to whoever ends up listening to this. You have mentioned that you have 4 businesses, so I'll just point people in your direction, which is, you can find Amber's business at ambercherelle.com. I will put that in the show notes so people can find you. And then you're on Facebook and Insta, Amber Moore, which is AMBAH.MOORE. Again, it will be in the show notes. So please do go check out Amber's offers to the world, and, you know, follow her for this beautiful, like I say, grounded confidence that didn't come from nowhere. It's been cultivated, you know, and it's been a journey. So that this is somebody you can learn from, and I would highly recommend that you do. So thank you so much, Amber.
Thank you so much for having me, Claire, and it's always been an excellent conversation, so thank you.
You're so welcome.